Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity and making meaning. I'm Daniel. Next week we'll be back with Dov, but just to give you a bit of an introduction to this episode, I'm joined by Sarah Boothby, whose daughter Maeve Owen died in 2021. Maeve wrote a book, a novel called The Alchemists, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Maeve's writing, and then Sarah's going to read from the book in excerpts. Because it was a long episode, we've split it into two. So after this one finishes, where we talk about Maeve and her writing, you can go straight on and listen to the second episode, which is Sarah reading, and we have a little bit of a discussion about some of the excerpts. So I hope you really enjoy it, and do get in touch. Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise. We're joined today by Sarah Boothby. Sarah's daughter Maeve died in 2021, but we're going to focus today on Maeve's writing. Maeve wrote a novel and had plans for a series of novels to come really before she died. So thank you for joining us today, Sarah, and it's lovely to have you, and it'll be great to just explore some of Maeve's writing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Maeve and her writing? And then we've got an audio clip to play as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me, Dan. It's really lovely to have this opportunity in the context of a lot of really horrible stuff. It's really, really great to be able to think about her and who she was rather than how she died. So it took a long time for her to recognize that she was a writer, and it really came because of being ill and being kind of, she used to make a great joke about earlier on about playing around with words. We'd always played around with words, and so she played around with the concept of invalid and invalid, which I'm sure lots of people have done, right, with chronic illness, because the older form of words is the invalid, and how she felt as a young woman who, she managed to get through school. She got to the end of her kind of state-maintained compulsory education before she got a diagnosis. She was ill before that, but she did manage to get through school. And she was a very high achiever academically. She was a natural scholar and a really great writer, but she didn't think of herself as a writer because just about everything she'd had to write was for school, and it's always a particular form of writing which she didn't enjoy. I mean, who does like writing for exams? It's not all horrible. But she did. She was lucky enough for both GCSE and A level. No, she didn't write at A level. It was just at GCSE. She did the Welsh Board, and the Welsh Board offer a creative writing paper if you opt for it. And I think I might have got that wrong because she was also very independent, right? So she knew what she was learning better than her teachers did, and I never ever had to nag her to do her homework. Like, never ever. If anything, it was the other way around. I would have to say, well, you're going to have to stop now because it's 8 o'clock. You'll be going to bed in about an hour, so stop. Have some wind down time. And we developed a kind of family habit of watching some kind of, something that we could binge on for weeks, months even, so we'd watch one episode of The Wire or something like that, and that would be the wind down, and then she'd go off to bed. And she was ill by this stage, but we didn't know what it was. Nobody else knew either. So in that writing, she wrote this beautiful essay, or creative writing, about anorexia, but she wouldn't tell me anything about it at all. I wasn't invited to read any drafts, unlike all the other essays, where it's like, have I said what I need to say? Please have a look at it. This one was all hers. And when I went to the parents' evening kind of halfway through the GCSE, the English teacher said, "Oh, Maeve," they would always do this. "Oh, she can do. She's so great. I love having her in my class." And I'm thinking, yeah, that's nice for you, the teacher. It's not so nice for her because nobody else in the class gets her. And they all think she's a nerd, which she was, right? Like, fair enough, she was a nerd. She knew the syllabus, so they would ask her questions rather than the teachers because she was one of them and she knew the answers. But it's like, well, who's she going to ask then? Who does she get to? So this English teacher, she was only there temporarily, covering for somebody's maternity leave. And she said, so now the thing about Maeve's creative writing is that she's gone over the word length, which makes it an A. It should be an A star. And I can see why she's gone over the word length, but I have to give her the A because she's got to, and it's like, that's just typical, isn't it? It's like, you've got an A star student, but you've got to give them an A because there's a rule that says, So then after that, I was allowed to read it. I go, no, baby, you didn't tell me anything about this. I have to read all your other things on, like, she used to hate writing the media essays. And okay, well, am I allowed to read this thing? And she said, well, yeah, right then. And it was absolutely fantastic. And it was exactly the same with this first draft of the novel, is that I might cry, Dan, so just excuse me, because grief is horrible.
It's all right.
But she wouldn't let anybody read it because it wasn't finished. And then when she knew that she had no options left, and she asked me to send the draft that she'd written on this app that I had no idea how to use. I'd never seen it before, to somebody that she'd met online who didn't know that she was ill, who was a professor of English in New York, right? So when Maeve was younger, she kind of idolized America. She used to have a picture of the map on the wall with all of the states outlined. And she, like most teenage girls, she liked to dress up and had loads of kind of very stylish photographs that were just street photos of street fashion from New York. So for her to have made this friend was like, oh, I didn't know you'd done that. But I can see who, knowing the person that you are, what that would mean to you. So it's like, yeah, I will try and figure out how to download the document into something that I can send by email to this person whose address you've got. And I sent it, and within a couple of weeks, it came back with this kind of incredibly glowing review, how wonderful it was and how it was ready for publication now. And so, like, just to get back to this is Maeve, knowing she's got a few weeks left. I mean, really just a few weeks left. And for her to get that recognition from somebody who had no idea that she was ill, not a clue, it just made her cry. It's like my life has got more meaning to it. And this horrible condition that has been so badly neglected is going to steal my life from me. And when I told her, it took me a while to let this professor of literature know that Maeve had died, and she had no idea. She had no idea that Maeve was ill. And we had a few conversations about the text, and she was very encouraging about getting it published. So I read it, and I didn't want to while Maeve was dying, and I kept putting off the next chapter because I didn't want it to end, because when it ended, that would just take us all a step closer to something that I couldn't stop, but I didn't want to happen. And I thought it was just, not only did I not want this to get to the end of it because it meant the end in more ways than one, but because it was so good. I wanted to savor it all. I read slowly anyway, and I just could not believe how well crafted it was. Every sentence was beautiful, and I couldn't understand how she'd done it because she hadn't had. I knew that she'd started on the draft because we talked about the characters and we talked about the plot over a long period of time, and I'd said at one point, you're going to have to just start writing, because I know that you've already got too much from everything that you've told me. And even though these characters are to be developed into a series, so she was the generation that grew up on Harry Potter, and so J.K. Rowling's method was probably a bit of a template for her, like plan the books in advance and then write them. And she, for those listening to this who are also Harry Potter aficionados, she was a Ravenclaw. Okay, so she it's, the heroic thing is to be a Gryffindor, but she knew she was a Ravenclaw. A lot of her friends were Hufflepuffs because they were kind and gentle, and she needed that, especially towards the end of her life, because she had such a fierce intellect. She really, maybe we should hear the clip, because I think it comes through in the clip. Like, this is from a recording that I made with her completely spontaneously one year. In fact, it was 2017, because it was the 100 years of women getting the right to vote that year. And I thought it would be good. I've always celebrated International Women's Day as, I prefer to celebrate that to Christmas, for example. It's like, this is a day that I know what I'm celebrating. Whereas Christmas, I can celebrate the days getting longer, but otherwise, not sure what I'm doing, apart from things that I don't want to do. So, the consumerism, I'm not interested. So we made this recording, and I think let's give it a try. Let's hope that the tech works and give it a try.
Yeah.
I think feminism is about being independent. Ultimately, I think it's about women being independent of men, financially, materially, psychologically, emotionally, not being dependent on male approval.
Yeah.
To have a feeling of self-worth or purpose, not being dependent on men to have meaning in your life.
Can you remember the first time that you thought, I'm probably a feminist? Do you remember the first time you heard the word feminism?
No.
No, I don't either. Do you think you've always been a feminist, though? Or do you think that you maybe have become one?
I think I have always wanted to be a feminist.
Oh, yeah.
I think there have always been ways in which I have unconsciously been a feminist. Especially growing up with you, because you demonstrated without making a big deal of it that women can do perfectly well without men, that you don't need a man to paint the living room or do the accounts. Though. Like, sure, it's nice, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
And I guess kind of make the idea of being ladylike just a kind of nonsense, that it's not about.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm not ladylike?
I think I am trying to tell you that you're not ladylike, because
what a backhanded compliment.
Because ladies go nim nim nim, and you do many things, but you do not go nim, right?
Don't I? That's interesting.
Like,
do I go gallopy?
Well,
then?
it used to be no,
down into the ditch. Thanks.
No, you used to go when I was little. Buying presents for you was really difficult, because it was like, my mum doesn't like cosmetics and jewellery, she doesn't want smelly things or pink things.
Actually, that's not strictly true, it's just that I'm very, very, very discerning.
Yeah. Right, okay, that's a big help to a 9-year-old.
Yeah, fair enough.
So it was like, yeah, I guess because you didn't do the girly lady thing, that it just, I guess it was like nobody at home is expecting me to behave in that way, so the external expectations, the cultural social expectations that's how you behave, were easier to shake off, because because it was only coming from out there, and out there doesn't have the best track record. So yeah, I don't know. When did you first know you were a feminist?
Well, I didn't even know there was such a thing as feminism for a long time, which is partly why I was asking you, because I wondered if maybe feminism has become more of a word that is in use, So I don't know. I mean, ironically for me, I kind of grew up with the second wave 70s. I don't even know which wave was which. But I think
first wave was the suffragettes.
Okay.
Retrospectively named the first wave.
Yeah.
Second wave was the 70s.
70s feminists.
Now apparently we're in the third wave.
Oh, good. I'm very glad to hear that we're in another wave.
Are you?
Well,
the third wave feminism seems to consist of t-shirts and trans.
Lipstick. Well, t-shirts are alright. They're quite a good garment. Easy to wash.
No, I mean t-shirts that say, "This is what a feminist looks like."
You mean Theresa May calling herself a feminist?
Well, it's that commercialisation thing, isn't it? Oh, feminism goes mainstream, we can make a profit from it, and just reduce it to... I mean, I think feminism, the kind of emerging social definition of feminism is not... I don't know, I guess it depends who you talk to, but just like this idea that equality and equivalence are not the same thing.
Yes, it must have been really poignant for you listening back to that and having that just little lovely snippet of Maeve to hear. But for us, I suppose it really highlights how sharp a mind she had and how she really thought quite deeply about things. And obviously she thought quite deeply about her writing. And was she an avid reader herself? Because it feels like she's just absorbed an awful lot of information from wherever,
absolutely.
here, there, and everywhere.
Absolutely.
Was reading a big thing for her?
Yeah. So, I mean, before she could read, it was a big thing. So, like any parent will remember the early years of being woken up before you're ready, right? Like the thing that I most longed for was to be able to wake up in my own time. When is the day going to come? It took 6 years before I was allowed to wake up in my own time. And that was probably because by then she had learned to read for herself. But what happened from the time, from the minute she could get out of bed by herself, she would grab a book and bring it to me and wake me up to read to her first thing in the morning. That's how much she liked books and reading. And there's a lovely bit in the novel about this house that she invented, where there's a library, and all of the bookcases are designed so that the sun will not bleach the spines, because that was always her concern. I mean, books were her thing. They were like objects as well as the thing that has what she wants in life in it. Which is how she met the American professors. During the pandemic lockdowns, when people were giving interviews over video, they liked to put themselves in front of a bookcase as some kind of symbolic representation of how expert they were. And so she and a friend that she'd met at college, who she reconnected with years later online, they hadn't been friends in college at all. That they together, who was also another avid reader with similar political kind of tendencies, and also they also had in common. This was the first friend Maeve ever had whose parents were separated. So I think that was quite a big relief for her to have somebody who would understand the tension of having these parents who just do not see eye to eye, and we really don't. I mean, it's a good thing. If anyone's ever worried about getting divorced, all I can say is do not stay married for the sake of the children, because it's not for the sake of the children. They will be better off if you separate. If you just don't understand each other, if you speak different languages, got different values, it's just miserable for all of you. So don't bother. It's fine being a single parent. It's not. It's really hard being a parent at all. But it's hard being a single parent because you do get stigmatized, but if you've got good relationships with your children, it doesn't really matter. The stigma is irrelevant because it doesn't belong with you. It belongs with the people who like to do the stigmatizing and not with you. And this friend and she set up this called Bethan, shout out to Bethan, because it's still there. Shelf absorption, as in self-absorption, more playing with words. And that's how they met this professor, because people were on their computers, and this professor who's called, I'm going to say it, I'll get it wrong, so I won't say it. But I'm really bad at names. She discovered them and thought this was wonderful because she's in university, she's teaching, so she's used to being around young people and young people's ideas, and to have these two young women on the other side of the Atlantic having a little play around, inviting people to describe their favourite books and why they were their favourite books. Bethan did most of the work, and it gave Maeve an opportunity to be in the world, and for lots of people with ME, those pandemic lockdowns were like, at last the rest of the world is living like we do. At last the world is coming to us. And it was the case. That was the only kind of venturing out that she managed to do from, well, unless it was for a medical appointment, and they were pointless. Save all your energy to go for a medical appointment, which will just send you home feeling worse with nothing at all. That was her only outing from 2016. Through the internet. Thankfully, there is the internet. Yeah, it is poignant to hear her voice, but it's also lovely for me to hear her voice because it's so lively, and she was so lively. Even when she was dying, she was lively. I don't know if you've ever been with someone who's dying, but there's a very, very big difference between the person when they're alive and when they're not. And she was still making terrible jokes about antiemetics, which is anti-sickness, for those that don't know. Kind of until she couldn't speak anymore, She could hardly speak. She was speaking in a whisper, but her wit and her intelligence never left her. So that I asked her towards the end, did you manage to rest your mind? Because that was the only place that the energy was being spent. And I still don't understand. I hope that medicine will get its act together and do the research that's needed, because how can you continue to deteriorate like that? How can you? I mean, she was being deprived of life-saving treatment that would have been given to somebody else. That much I'm completely confident about because of her diagnosis. But that doesn't explain how aggressive ME can get to me. It really, really doesn't. And her that because we don't have photographs, because who wants to be photographed when they're not feeling very well? I don't.
No,
I mean, I'm not very good at photographs anyway. But yeah, would you like to have your photo? No, don't take a photo. And I did ask her for some photographs so that I could show people as evidence. But I'm not putting them out there when she didn't want to be remembered for being ill. For those last images, I'm very grateful to the families that have done that, because they're very graphic representations of how poorly people become. But Maeve did not want to be remembered for being ill, so this is my effort to honour her for who she was and not what she was turned into by an illness.
And I guess the book will be a legacy of sorts for her, and I think for you to feel that sense of closeness with who she was as well. And do you want to tell us a bit about the book and the plot and the story? And I know we were going to read from it as well, so I'll let you kind of guide that.
So Dan, you told me that you don't really read fiction any longer because it sends you to sleep. If this sends you to sleep, I will take full
No,
responsibility.
no. Well, I didn't mean it quite like that. I would love. No, I would love to. I would love to read fiction, and it's just that for me, um, my tiredness gets the better of me, and
Absolutely, does
I
me.
struggle to keep. I struggle to keep track of when there's lots and lots of characters and who's who, and then where the plot's going, and then my brain just struggles to absorb all that information. So it's amazing that I did actually try writing a novel or a book early on in my illness because I had the time and I had more brain energy, and it's probably like a third completed, but I've never gone back to it because it was just too much, the writing, and I've noticed that because I blogged quite a lot when I first got ill as well, and for me that I've noticed now when I write my sharpness isn't there in the same way. So yeah, so when I'm reading, even audiobooks, I'll listen to an audiobook and then if it's fiction, I might fall asleep, but then I'll get lost in the story, and then I've got to go back and find out where I was again and things like that. So for me, I still like reading, and it's audiobooks, but it's non-fiction because you can listen to half a chapter of something and then pick it up a bit later. They might start talking about something else in the same kind of vein, but I haven't kind of lost anything of a plot of something. So that's why, yeah, I struggle with reading fiction. Not that I wouldn't want to, because and I'm sure if as and when Maeve's book comes back, I will probably make a concerted effort to read it, because I've read some of the excerpts now that we're going to read, and yeah, I got drawn in really quickly in just the first sort of half a chapter or introduction of it. So maybe it's the books that I'm trying to read. Maybe I'm not reading trying to read good quality enough books. But yeah, do you want to start? And I've got a bit of I've got it here so I can follow. But I know we were going to sort of maybe discuss some of the things that maybe have come from, although Maeve wasn't writing about Emmy, there's certainly reflections of her experience within the book. Is that right?
It was really difficult to choose which bits, because it's so well crafted. Like her teacher said, she couldn't cut it for length for her GCSE, and this novel, taking something out, decontextualizes it from what is beautifully crafted. It's like you pull a string out, and it's like, well, I've got the string, but the fabric of the story is so well woven, and the characters so carefully introduced. I mean, I just think she was practicing being a toddler and bringing books to be read in bed at the first thing in the morning, just soaking it all up. How do you put a story together? And of course, she's half Irish, so the gift of the Blarney is definitely a gift. And she was also, off the scale when it came to aptitude tests for verbal reasoning. So her facility with words and languages are also really good. So that, and I'm saying all of this because I do want to encourage people through your podcast who've got ME or living with someone who's got ME to use their creativity as the escape from the illness, because it is the best escape from the illness. In my experience, observing somebody from the outside, if you dwell on the symptoms too much, you feel terrible. So you have to stop dwelling on the symptoms and you have to put your mind somewhere else. But how do you do that when you're feeling terrible already? And this way, this way of working with the imagination and creativity, you do have to draw on who you are. You can't pretend to be somebody that you're not. And so in Maeve's case, it took her a long time to accept that writing was her medium. She was a singer to begin with, which is great for a writer, because the sound and the feel and the rhythm of the words is part of where her talent lies, and so it's a lovely read because of its rhythm, which might help you go to sleep, but it might also engage you in the same way that rhythms will. It's like once you're into a rhythm, the rhythm keeps you going, and also her use of imagery. She'd been she grew up on Dartmoor, and the book is set on Dartmoor, so she drew on childhood experiences, which most writers do. Right, they do every piece of writing that I've ever read. Once you then make a bit of an investigation of the author, you go, oh, this is autobiographical. these are just metaphors that have been employed. But what she did, so that interview about, what did she think she was a feminist or not, and her surprise that I would even ask is also in the book, and she set it in the 1920s because she didn't know anything about it, and she had the kind of mind that has to be fed. She needed to nourish her mind, and so she wanted to set it in a time that she didn't know anything about, and listen to a lot of audio books written in the 1920s or set in the 1920s to adopt some of the voice and some of the kind of figures of speech from the 1920s, slightly later in cases. But she was such a good scholar. She was very diligent and very detailed about her approach. So, when you say in her approach, when you say about having started writing and then feeling that you're not so sharp, and then coming back to fiction, not being able to keep track of characters, I think that's normal for everybody, right? Like, keeping track of a huge cast of characters is tricky. So what she did was break everything down into a bit like she would be prepping for an exam. She'd have cue cards, and on the card was the briefest outline of either the time or the place, the date or the character. And all of that was color-coded, very systematic. So lots of work went into this for years. And by the time I said to her, you're going to have to start writing because you've got too much already. I know from what you've told me, you've got too much already. She only had 20 minutes on a good day to do anything in. But I imagine, and this is just me guessing, is that what she was doing the rest of the time when she was trying to rest and trying to get, take the attention away from the symptoms, she tried all the meditation apps like everybody does. She tried the Nidra yoga. Everybody that I know who's got ME wants to be well, and they do everything they can to be well. But sometimes the only wellness comes from not thinking about it. And I think she was phrasing in those times, so that by the time she knew that she had enough to actually get on to, she wrote it on an iPad on this app. Like I said, I don't understand where she got it from, how it worked. And it was a bit of a struggle to convert it into a PDF and then convert it into something that I can edit on. Her fingers knew already the phrasing. She knew what she was going to write before she started to write it. I'm not that kind of writer. For me, I just bash out a whole load of ideas because I've got horribly good health. It's just unfair. I just bash stuff out and then I go back and work on it. She never had a chance to go back and work on it, which is I'm going to read you a bit in a minute because it is really impressive to be able to craft such well-structured sentences straight off. I think that's ME working, making you into something that you weren't, but then you kind of tap into who you are, who you want to be, and to escape from the symptoms, even if it is only for 20 minutes on a good day. At least that escape is there, and the prospect of being able to escape is there. And from what I've read from people who survived the very severe for longer than Maeve did, and Maeve would have survived for a lot longer if she'd been treated. There is no question about that, which is why there's an inquest. But she never could. I mean, with AI, it's very different now already, but she could never find a voice activated software that would do it. And she didn't have the voice to activate her phone, which is how she would call me. It would be through voice activation if she needed me, once she became bedbound. And that didn't last forever. But the things that I've read from people who have survived, they say something similar, is that you have to make a space in your mind, like a meditation, where you want to go and take yourself there. Not in the kind of guided meditations where you end up finding all sorts of stuff from the unconscious that you wish you didn't have to encounter, but somewhere that you really do want to go. And for Maeve, it was this book and these characters. She loved these characters. And when you read them, you can tell how much each of them meant. You know, they are fully rounded people. And growing up on Dartmoor, she'd been involved with theatre, so she learnt to be in a play and write a play from a very young age, which is quite unusual. But it was a community theatre that encouraged young people to participate, and it was lovely, all original work. So that also gave her a kind of confidence that lots of people don't have the privilege of. So shall I try and read a bit? Never done this before, Dan.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. And the other thing, just to say before I do get stuck in, is that I have sent you the cast of characters. So for those people who do struggle, then hopefully there'll be a way that you can make that available. I don't know how technically for other people to know who the people are.
We could put it on our website, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a good idea, I think. Okay, so like I said, it was really hard to extract. And what I've chosen to start with, and I think you, for time, you must just interrupt me when it's too much, is from chapter 1, because chapter 1 is like any good piece of writing. It establishes what's going to come next. And she organised it as much as I saw her process. She was very fastidious on detail. It's an historical novel set in the 1920s, and to take herself into the world of the 1920s, she did a lot of research while she was well enough to do it, and with some help from the local history society, helped her with information, and she organised it around dates from the actual year. So this first chapter starts 1 Saturday the 25th of March, and we're in 1922, but she will tell you that. And then she's got a working title for this chapter called An Unusual Occurrence. The post did not come. As anyone who has been unfortunate enough to experience such an event will know, an absent post is keenly felt. It being the 26th of March, many of the villagers laughed that the postman, having spent the previous week reminding each household that summertime would begin that Sunday, had at last forgotten and overslept himself. However, once the news had reached Mrs. Coulsley that her husband had made no deliveries that morning, and she had assured her neighbours that she had seen Mr. Coulsley off at the usual hour in accordance with British summertime, those smiles became somewhat anxious, and people began to ask what could have befallen their postman, and some feared the worst.